Spider-Wars! Come out and play!
Tag!
Superhero games were a big part of my childhood. And I know they go way back. Before this, we had superhero games on the Super Nintendo, the Genesis, arcade machines, and just plenty of older systems. A lot of them were great in their own way, and some of them are still worth going back to. But for me, there was one game that really made that superhero fantasy click in a different way. If you're familiar with the channel, you already know a lot of my earliest gaming memories are tied to my dad and a PlayStation 1 and a trailer sitting in the middle of the woods. And Spider-Man was one of the few games we had. I remember playing it back then and barely caring about finishing the levels. I'd get into the early rooftop stages and just swing around. I'd crawl on walls, zip through the air, mess with the web attacks, and just enjoy the feeling of controlling Spider-Man. And looking back at it now, I think that's what makes this game special to me. Spider-Man on PS1 was limited, it was boxed in, and it was built around the restrictions of its hardware. And you can feel those restrictions all over it. But it also understood something that superhero games would keep chasing for decades. A good superhero game has to do more than just give you enemies to fight. It has to make you feel like the character. And somehow, using the foundation of a skateboarding engine, Neversoft built a Spider-Man game that captured that movement. The voices, the villains, just the comic book energy. And the simple joy of being this character in a 3D world. It was small by modern standards, but for a lot of us who played it as kids, it felt massive.
Level 3. 2 more to go.
So did this help build the foundation for modern superhero games?
Do you have any threes?
Go fish!
What was Spider-Man?
We're too late. That makes 2 major technology heists in 2 days.
That leaves one question. Where's Rhino?
Spider-Man landed in a genre that already had history. Superhero games had already been around for years, and Spider-Man had already been in games before this. So the thing we gotta look at here is specifically when the game came out. By 2000, 3D had changed what people expected from a character. A side-scroller or arcade brawler could give us the costume, the attacks, the villains, and the pace of a comic book fight. Those games could be great because the format kept the idea simple. You just moved across the screen, fought what was in front of you, and the game could focus on the energy of the experience. A 3D superhero game had a different problem.
Gotta keep moving.
Now we have to understand depth. The camera had to keep up, the space had to stay clear and easy to navigate, movement had to feel good from more than one angle. And once a game puts a superhero in that kind of world, the character has to feel specific. That's where Spider-Man becomes tricky.
Another one taken down by your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
With Spider-Man, the whole fantasy is tied to movement. Rooftops, walls, ceilings, gaps, vents, ledges, and even open air all become part of how the character should work. A regular 3D action level gives you floors and hallways and rooms, but a Spider-Man level has to think about the actual surfaces. So Neversoft was dealing with a bigger question than just making a licensed action game. How do you make Spider-Man feel right on PS1 hardware?
Mary Jane was right. I should have stayed home today.
That's where the studio's history starts getting really cool in my opinion. Neversoft's path to Spider-Man goes through one of the weirdest development chains you could ask for. The trail leads back through Apocalypse, the 1998 action game starring Bruce Willis, and even further to an unreleased game called Big Guns. Neversoft kept reusing and reshaping technology from project to project, carrying work from Big Guns into Apocalypse, and then into what would become Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. And I just love how weird that is, because Apocalypse feels like it comes from a completely different universe. It has that late 90s action movie energy, where everything is just extremely loud, there's these over-the-top explosions, and the big selling point is obviously Bruce Willis. And that somehow became skateboarding, and that adds another interesting layer to it. Because Tony Hawk's Pro Skater didn't start as Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Neversoft had already been working on a skateboarding game, and that super early version, before Tony Hawk was attached to it, had Bruce Willis in as the stand-in for the skater. So just picture that for a second. Bruce Willis riding around on a skateboard, doing tricks and spinning. It sounds like a joke, but it also shows what Neversoft was figuring out. They were taking the same base and pushing it into a completely different kind of game. Tony Hawk became movement, timing, flow, and understanding the levels at a high speed as you move through them. That's where the studio really sharpens the skill that connects to Spider-Man. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater teaches you how to look at the world differently. A rail becomes a line, a ramp becomes a launch point. all the gaps become part of your route. That way of thinking about the actual space around you is what connects this to Spider-Man. The studio had already spent years building games around movement and navigation, and by the time Spider-Man came, they were used to designing levels where the environment itself shaped how you move through it.
Hey, you could put someone's eye out with that.
So when Activision had the Marvel license and started looking for a developer, Neversoft had a pretty unusual background for this kind of character. That gave them a real way into Spider-Man. Lead designer Chad Findley had said Neversoft had Tony Hawk up and running around this time. And Joe Jewett saw Spider-Man as a good fit for the studio. And that fit shows up because of the problems Findley pointed out. The big challenges were web swinging and wall crawling, and that really tells us what they had to figure out first. Before the story, villains, the comic book framing, before any of that could work, Spider-Man had to feel like an actual superhero the player could control. The swinging had to feel good, the wall crawling had to actually be useful. And the levels had to be built around both of those things. And with Neversoft's experience in their previous titles, they were the perfect fit. And it's really the setup for the whole game here. Spider-Man is clearly working within limits. The rooftops are boxed in, the city's covered by fog, the swing system is extremely simple, and the camera feels like a PlayStation-era camera. But the focus still comes through. Neversoft took a toolset shaped by action and constant movement, then applied it to a superhero who depends on movement more than most anything else. Now let's take a look at how you actually move through the city. The game builds New York as a sequence of Spider-Man situations. It's not really trying to simulate the entire city at once. Instead, it keeps asking what kind of thing Spider-Man would be doing next and then builds a level around that idea. You move through rooftops, office buildings, banks, sewers, tunnels, labs, and villain hideouts. Each area gives the character a different kind of job, and that's how the game keeps its momentum behind everything. Every location feels tied to something Spider-Man would naturally be dealing with, which really helps the game stay focused.
More where that came from. How'd that feel?
The rooftops are where the game really opens up. That's where we swing across gaps, zip around, stay above the city, and feel like we're moving through New York from the top down. The streets are hidden under fog, and that's clearly a workaround for the PlayStation hardware. The game narrows the city into the part Spider-Man would already be using the most: the rooftops, the ledges, signs, and just all that space between the buildings. I think that's a clever way to handle the limitation. The game gives you the idea of New York without having to build every street underneath it. We can still feel the city below, even though the playable area is really happening above it. And then the game pulls you inside. Those sections feel a lot more enclosed, but they're usually still built with height in mind. The ceilings are extremely high, the rooms are wide enough to move around in, and there's walls and surfaces Spider-Man can actually use. So the feeling changes. Outside, the game's about crossing large amounts of distance. Inside, it becomes more about using the room itself. That contrast gives the game a good rhythm in my opinion. The level design keeps moving between rooftop routes and tighter mission spaces. So even with the limits of the hardware, the game finds different ways to make Spider-Man move through the world.
Okay, quit shooting the lasers.
The objectives help shape that also. Sometimes we're just trying to reach the next area, or trying to save hostages. Sometimes we're chasing someone, escaping danger, fighting through enemies, or dealing with a boss. The hostage sections probably feel the most Spider-Man in terms of what the character is supposed to be doing. He's saving people. He's responding to the danger they're in, doing the hero work. Those sections aren't really my favorite though, but they do fit the role. The rooftop chases are the ones I enjoy the most. That's where the game gives you a lot of speed and pressure at the same time. Chasing Venom, escaping the police helicopter, or trying to stay close during a pursuit gives you a reason to keep moving. The chase meter it gives you is pretty simple, but it changes the feeling of the level. You're trying to keep pace, stay in control, and react fast enough to stay with the scene. So the game's built around smaller Spider-Man scenarios inside one larger problem. There's the fog, the overall framing, and the question of who's behind everything. That's the main issue hanging over the story. Then each chapter gives you a smaller situation inside that larger arc. A bank heist, an underground section, or a machine that just needs to be destroyed. That's where the comic book framing really starts to work. Before the major sections, the game gives you comic covers. And as a kid, I just thought those were super cool. It felt good to see a cover pop up before the next part of the game. But going back to it now, I really appreciate what those covers are doing. They make each section feel like an issue in a larger Spider-Man run. The game's level-based, but the covers make that structure feel intentional. We're turning from one part of the story into the next.
It's no other. The symbiote known as Carnage. We must stop him.
Stan Lee's narration adds to that same feeling. His voice gives the game this extra comic book energy. He sounds genuinely excited to bring us into another Spider-Man story.
Plunging into battle with symbiotes other than Carnage and Venom?
And that passion he brings helps the whole thing feel bigger than the actual levels are. So the overall structure is pretty simple on the surface. We move from level to level, clear objectives, follow the story, and just keep pushing forward to the next section. The personality comes from how the game frames those levels.
You shall not escape me!
Hey, just real quick, if you made it this far into the video, thank you for hanging out with me for a bit. If you're enjoying it, consider subbing. There's a lot of content like this already on the channel, and there's always more coming. If you want to help the video grow, leave it a like and drop a comment as well. Let me know if you have any memories with this game, or what your favorite early superhero game was. But that's enough of all that. Let's get back into it, and look at how the combat works.
Everyone knows you can't control the symbiotes!
Hey, wait! So, I'm a Rhino, you're a Scorpion, and he's an Octopus. What's a Mysterio?
So the combat in this is pretty straightforward. You have your punches, kicks, just basic combos, and a few web abilities layered on top of that. Against regular enemies, that basic setup works fine. You can run in, throw a few hits, jump around, and just keep moving through the level without needing to overthink every encounter. What I like about it is that the game gives you room to mix things up. Most fights aren't demanding some exact answer from you. A lot of the time, you get through enemies with just normal punches and kicks. Then once you start getting comfortable, the web tools gives the combat more of that Spider-Man personality. You can wrap enemies up with basic webbing, fire impact webbing from a distance, boost your melee damage with web gloves, or throw out a web dome when enemies start crowding around you. None of that turns the combat into something overly deep. It just gives you enough options to approach fights in different ways. That's really where the system works for me. The fun comes from choosing to fight like Spider-Man. You can punch an enemy a few times, jump around, fire impact webbing, reposition, web someone up, or just finish a fight with boosted melee damage. The game gives you a small tool set, then lets you decide how much of it you want to use.
The robbers have been taken care of, but what can I do about the bomb? Think, Spidey, think!
The web meter adds a little bit of pressure to that. It's never something I felt like I had to constantly worry about though. The game gives you enough web refills that you can usually keep some on you. But at the same time, you are aware that webs are a resource. You can't just sling web attacks at every single enemy without thinking about it at all. That gives the combat a light rhythm. Punches and kicks are always available. The web abilities cost something. There's health pickups laying around and web cartridges that let you keep using the tools that make the combat feel more like Spider-Man. Then the game adds special webbing on top of that. There's fire webbing. It's not part of the default moveset, so you have to find the special web cartridges for it. Once you have it, certain enemies become a lot easier to deal with. It gives the pickup a more specific purpose than just being another version of a normal attack. The different web abilities also have their own roles. The web gloves are really useful against enemies that have more health, like the symbiotes, while the web dome acts more like a panic button when you get surrounded. That's the thing with most of these abilities. They're not all equally useful all the time. Some are better for bosses, or when enemies crowd you, or just when you need to hit harder. The game gives each tool a small lane. Boss fights show that pretty well. Defensively, most bosses have their own pattern or setup. You're watching how they move, where the danger's coming from, and when the opening shows up. But offensively, a lot of them come down to just spacing, timing, and impact webbing. That's all you really do. You learn the pattern, find the moment, fire the shot, and then reset.
Uh-oh! Looks like his shield is regenerated!
It can be simple, but it gives each fight its own rhythm. The bosses feel different because of what you're avoiding and how the arena works. Aside from a few, actually dealing damage is usually pretty much the same. That keeps the fights easy to understand, and lets the personality of each encounter come from the situation around it. There's also small environmental details. Spider-Man can pick up objects like chairs or desks and throw them at enemies. I never really use that very much, but it's cool that that option exists. It makes the room feel a little bit more physical. Being able to grab nearby objects and throw them at enemies adds a little extra variety to the fights. And that fits the character. Spider-Man should feel like someone who improvises. He should be able to use webs, movement, nearby objects, spacing, and quick reactions to get through a fight. The game gives you a very simple version of that idea. And for this game, the time it came out and what it was going for, well, I feel like that's enough.
Toro!
One of the cooler parts of Spider-Man is how much extra Spider-Man material is tucked around in the game. The character viewer is probably the best example. You can look at the character models, read about who they are, see which comic they first appeared in, and hear Stan Lee talk about them.
Venom hates Spider-Man so much that he will do almost anything to ruin his life.
As a kid who was obsessed with superheroes, that kind of thing was something that I would have sat there for a while with. Now, it feels like a cool extra, but back then, it felt like the game was teaching me the world around Spider-Man. That's the part I appreciate about it. The game gives you the campaign, then it gives you a place to slow down and look through the characters, like you're flipping through a small Spider-Man reference guide. The alternate costumes work the same way. Some of them change gameplay, and that's really cool, but for me, the real appeal of alternate costumes has always been the feeling of playing as another version of the character. The Scarlet Spider, Spider-Man 2099, Captain Universe. Each of those names carry their own history. Even when the change is mostly visual, the whole fantasy changes a little bit. You're still playing the same game, but the suit lets you bring another piece of Spider-Man's comic history into it.
Oh, you want some more?
The hidden comic book covers adds another layer to that. During a normal playthrough, you can find a few of them, but some of them take some more exploring, or figuring out how to make them pop up. I noticed one during the final boss fight that appeared and disappeared pretty quickly, so getting them all clearly takes more effort than just running through the levels. But that just adds more Spider-Man history to the game. That makes them feel like real bonuses for people who want to dig around. They're not the center of the game, but they add to the feeling that this was made for Spider-Man fans. The covers, the suits, the character viewer, and Stan Lee's bios all point back to the comics. That's what all this comes down to. Spider-Man gives the player more than a campaign. It gives them a small piece of Spider-Man history to unlock, look through, and play around with. The extras are just super cool because they connect the game to the larger comic book world around the character.
You can run, Venom, but you can't hide!
So the story in this is extremely easy to follow, and I think that kind of helps the game. It starts at a science expo where Doc Ock is showing off some new technology. Peter's there and covering the event. And everything seems normal until someone dressed as Spider-Man breaks in and steals the device.
What's he doing? Gotta get into my costume and take out this imposter.
So right away, the game gives us the main problem. Spider-Man's been framed. From there, the whole city turns against him. J. Jonah Jameson does what he always does. The police starts chasing him, and Spider-Man has to clear his name while figuring out who stole the device and why this strange fog is covering New York. I think that's a pretty cool setup. It gives the game a big mystery, puts Spider-Man under pressure, and gives every level a reason to keep moving. He's trying to stay ahead of the police, protect people, chase leads, deal with villains, and figure out who's behind the larger threat. The plot gets a bit bigger pretty fast though. What starts with the stolen device turns into a citywide crisis involving symbiotes, hidden machines, villain team-ups, and eventually Doc Ock and Carnage working behind everything. And the really cool thing is how many names the game throws at you along the way. Scorpion shows up, there's Rhino, Venom, Mysterio, Black Cat, the Lizard's world gets pulled in through the sewer sections. There's J. Jonah. Then the game starts bringing in the larger Marvel universe too, with cameos like Captain America, Daredevil, Punisher, and Human Torch. It gives the story a very packed feeling. It feels like one of those Spider-Man stories where every few pages another familiar face comes through the door, making the adventure feel bigger and more connected to the wider Marvel universe. Some are there for plot, and some are there just for fan service. The point is that the game keeps reminding you that Spider-Man belongs to a larger comic book world. Venom is probably the best example of the game's personality. At first, he's part of the problem because he thinks Spider-Man is responsible for what happened at the expo. That sends the story into a long chase, with Venom constantly showing up to make Spider-Man's life harder.
Parker hates it when I get the drop on it.
I hate it when he gets the drop on me.
And once he realizes Spider-Man was framed, that whole dynamic shifts. Instead of hunting Spider-Man, he starts helping him, though helping might be giving Venom a bit too much credit. He's still unpredictable and still causes plenty of chaos, but now that chaos is pointed in the same direction. It gives the middle of the game a lot more personality, and every appearance adds a burst of energy to the story.
Now, the imposter was a shapeshifter, so that means it was either Mysterio or the Chameleon.
Hey, Chameleon was our idea. We thought of that.
Tell me this, Einstein. Who could have wanted to steal Octavius' technology?
Ooh, we know.
That's one of the things this game gets right about Spider-Man as a character. The story is serious enough to keep moving and keep everything grounded, but Spider-Man himself is still Spider-Man. He jokes, he has these big reactions, he gets overwhelmed. He sounds human in the middle of all the over-the-top chaos.
No, little spider, you will die!
Is it too late for us to be friends?
That voice is a huge part of why the game works. Spider-Man can have the movement, the suit, the webs, the villains, but the character also needs that attitude. He needs that quick reaction to danger. He needs to have these little jokes, that confidence that feels like it's partly real and partly him just trying to stay calm while everything is going wrong. Rhino Romano gives that kind of energy here. He sounds like a Spider-Man that can be funny and sarcastic, but also worried and heroic, without feeling like a different character from scene to scene. That helps carry the story because the plot keeps getting bigger and Spider-Man's voice keeps it grounded. All this also helps with how packed the story gets, because by the time the game reaches the back half, there's a lot going on. The overall framing leads into the fog leads into the symbiotes lead into symbiote generators. There's Carnage, Doc Ock, and eventually a final monster Ock chase. You fight Carnage and Doc Ock is revealed as one of the main forces behind the plan. Then the Carnage symbiote merges with Doc Ock and turns him into this weird final monster that chases Spider-Man through the collapsing base. And that final escape is insane in the exact way this game has been building towards. It's extremely fast and it's easy to get panicked. The game takes two of the major villains, smashes them together, and turns the ending into a chase where Spider-Man has to survive something that feels way bigger than a normal boss fight. That's the kind of story this game's telling. It's trying to give us a Spider-Man event full of villains, cameos, jokes, danger, and comic book energy. And I think the story works because it feels like a Saturday morning Spider-Man marathon stuffed into a PlayStation disc. When you look back at the reception, the first thing that jumps out is that Spider-Man landed really well. The PlayStation version reviewed really strong, but what's interesting is why. Critics kept coming back to the same thing we've been talking about throughout this entire video. The movement, the powers, the comic book presentation, the voice work, and the feeling that the developers actually understood Spider-Man as a character. That's the part that stands out to me looking back at those reviews. People were responding to the fact that it really felt like Spider-Man. That was the quality critics kept coming back to. And this was still a licensed superhero game in 2000, and I think it's easy to forget what that meant at the time. When you look back now, superhero games were everywhere, but back then, a licensed game could immediately make people cautious. There was always this question of whether the developers were building a good game that happened to feature a popular character, or whether they were relying on the character to do most of the work. A lot of licensed games had earned that reputation by putting the name first and figuring out the game second. Spider-Man felt different because the character was built into the experience, and critics picked up on that.
At full health.
The game delivered on the fantasy people wanted from Spider-Man, and the presentation helped sell it. The comic covers, Stan Lee's narration, all the villains and voice acting, and gave it personality that stood out from other licensed games at that time. That's why the praise around this game feels pretty consistent. People responded to how complete the Spider-Man package felt. GameSpot's review even pointed out how well the game used the Tony Hawk engine foundation, especially with the larger environments and the way Spider-Man's abilities functioned inside them. IGN also rated the PlayStation version extremely high, with the kind of praise that shows how strongly this game landed for its era. So when people talk about Spider-Man now, the conversation isn't only about it being a decent licensed game. It was about finally getting a Spider-Man game that felt like it understood what people wanted from Spider-Man. That said, the rough spots were still there. The camera could be awkward, the controls could feel stiff in some of the areas, the levels were boxed in, the city was hidden under fog, and the game had the limits of a late PlayStation game. That's why the reception is worth looking at in context. Critics weren't praising a perfect superhero game. They were praising a game that captured the character well enough that the limitations became easier to accept. And that same thing applies to the later versions. Once the game moved to stronger hardware like the Dreamcast, expectations changed. A game that felt impressive on PlayStation could feel more restricted when people expected better visuals, smoother control, and more from the hardware. But that doesn't erase how well the original release landed. It just shows how quickly the standard was moving at the time. For the PlayStation audience in 2000, Spider-Man arrived at the perfect moment. The game landed with everyone because people could feel the effort to make Spider-Man playable as Spider-Man.
And deadly turrets pointing straight at me. Oh, my day just keeps getting better and better.
So now let's get to the title of the video. When I call Spider-Man the blueprint for modern superhero games, I mean that in a very specific way. I'm talking about the shape of the idea, because modern superhero games are expected to do a lot now. They have bigger worlds, deeper systems, cinematic stories, larger budgets, and far more room to build out the fantasy. Spider-Man obviously comes from a smaller era. It's a PlayStation 1 game. The camera has the kind of problems you'd expect from that time. And yet, when you look at what the game's trying to solve, the shape's already there. A modern superhero game has to answer one question before anything else. What does it feel like to be this character? That question runs through almost every good superhero game now. For Spider-Man, movement comes first. The player has to really feel that body in motion, the swinging, climbing, flipping around, launching off buildings, cutting through the sky. All that becomes part of the character. That's why the Insomniac game spends so much energy on traversal. The really nice web swinging animations weren't just decoration around the game, it's the thing that makes the player believe in the role. Spider-Man was already chasing that idea. In a smaller form with simpler tools, it understood that Spider-Man had to move differently. The rooftops, walls, the vertical spaces were all trying to make the player read the world through Spider-Man's body. That's the first piece here. The hero needs a way of moving that belongs to them. Then comes combat. Modern superhero games are usually built around character-specific fighting. Batman uses fear, gadgets, counters, stealth. He's clearly the predator in all the areas. Spider-Man uses speed, webs, air movement, gadgets, and improvisation. Wolverine is his claws and just pure rage, aggression, and brutality. The combat has to speak the character's language. Spider-Man 2000 is rougher, but it's already thinking that way. The punches and kicks are simple, then the webs give the fights their identity. It gives the player a basic version of Spider-Man improvising through a fight. That's the second piece. The power set has to shape the way we fight. Then there are the missions. A superhero game can give the player enemies forever, and that only covers one part of the fantasy. The role has to show up in what the game asks you to do. Spider-Man understands that too. It gives you the rooftop chases, the hostage rescues, the boss fights, the sewer sections, and just moments where the pressure comes from keeping up instead of clearing a room. Some of those missions are stronger than others, but the structure keeps asking what Spider-Man would actually be doing in this situation. That's a big part of why the game still feels like Spider-Man. The missions are built around the role. That's another piece modern superhero games still use. Batman investigates, stalks criminals, clears gang hideouts, and solves crimes. Spider-Man stops crimes, saves people, chases villains, moves through the city, and handles problems that come from his world. The game has to give the hero the right kind of work. That's where Spider-Man 2000 was ahead of a lot of licensed games from its era. It was looking at Spider-Man as a full role instead of a character model placed inside action levels. The next piece is presentation. Modern superhero games do a lot of work to make the world feel connected to the source material. Suits, character bios, collectibles, references, voice performances, villains, cameos, comic history, and small fan details all help sell the idea that you're stepping into that hero's world. Spider-Man had an early form of that. The comic covers frame the chapters like issues. Stan Lee narrates the story and talks through character bios. That stuff gives the game a different kind of feeling. It feels like the developers wanted the player to spend time with Spider-Man as a character, as a comic history, and as a world. That's another part of it. The fan material around the game helps the fantasy last beyond the main levels. You see that expectation everywhere now. Modern superhero games usually come packed with suits, callbacks, lore entries, side characters, collectibles, and references. People just expect that now. They want to play as the hero, and they also want access to the history around the hero. This was already giving players a small version of that. Then there's the voice and personality. This is one of the biggest pieces for Spider-Man specifically. A Spider-Man game can have the webs and rooftops and the villains and suits, and the character can still feel off if the voice is wrong. Spider-Man needs the jokes, he needs that nervous energy, the confidence, the little reactions that make him feel human while everything around him is just completely insane. I think that's one of the reasons the game's held up in people's memory. Rhino Romano gives Spider-Man enough personality to carry the story. He jokes with the villains, reacts to the danger, sounds overwhelmed when the situation gets out of hand, and still keeps that quick Spider-Man energy moving through the game. That's become a major expectation for superhero games now. The hero has to feel alive between the mechanics. The way they talk, react to things, joke, get angry, or push through pain has become part of the design. Modern games understand that the voice is part of the whole fantasy. We're not only using powers, we're spending time inside a personality. And Spider-Man was already doing that in a PS1 way. That's where the blueprint idea works for me. The game's not the final version of the modern superhero formula. It's an early drawing of it. And when I say blueprint, I'm thinking about what a blueprint actually is. It's a plan, a layout. It shows where the pieces go before the finished building exists. Spider-Man has that kind of layout. All those pieces are smaller here, and they're rougher too. The hardware limits are obvious. The design's early, but later games would take these ideas much further. Treyarch's Spider-Man 2 would push the open world city and web swinging forward in a massive way. Insomniac's Spider-Man games would turn the fantasy into a full modern package. Those games are just mind-blowing. New York's massive, the traversal is amazing, there's cinematic storytelling, there's deeper combat, and an overall stronger emotional core. And now from Wolverine coming from Insomniac, that same expectation's following another Marvel hero. The question around that game is not only whether it will be a good action game, but it's whether it'll feel like Wolverine. The way he attacks or reacts to damage, just the overall tone of it. All that has to be designed around who he is. That's the modern superhero game standard. People expect the game to be shaped around the hero. Spider-Man was one of the early games that really seemed to understand that. It gave us a Spider-Man who could swing, crawl, fight with webs, save people, chase villains, make jokes, and move through a story that felt like a playable Saturday morning cartoon marathon. That's why the game still feels special. It gave people enough of the fantasy to believe in the character.
So, nice of you to join us for once, Spidey.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was out saving the world. Beating you guys at cards ought to be pretty easy.
Your spider sense
won't save you here. Look who's talking, Daredevil. You've been looking at my cards all night.
I don't need to look at your cards, Punisher.
And that's Spider-Man. Thanks for hanging out with me for a bit. I really appreciate you spending your time here. If you enjoyed the video, consider subbing. There's already a lot of content like this on the channel, and there's always more coming. If you want to help the video grow, leave it a like, drop a comment, and share it around. All that really helps a ton. I also want to give a quick shout out to all the channel members. I seriously can't express how much I appreciate you all, and I hope the new membership perks have felt worth it. But again, thank you all, and as always, I'll see y'all later.
Supervillains, and you can shake a web at it, of course. Non-stop web slinging, wall crawling.